Welcome to the Save Childhood podcast with Jennifer McCarville. Because childhood has changed, but children have not.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Save Childhood podcast.
I'm Jennifer McCarville.
And I'm Nicole Dugan. And on today's episode, we are talking about 4 very important types of literature and how they have a role in child development.
Yes, we are. We're talking about, nursery rhymes, fairy tales, tall tales, and fables.
Yeah, and why it's important for children to hear those, know those, and how they're embedded into their rhythms of their days and in their life, right?
Right. Did you read nursery rhymes when you were little? Did you know a lot of nursery rhymes?
I think I did.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Can you remember, any of them?
Humpty Dumpty?
Yeah, that's so popular, right?
What else?
Or fairy tales, or...
Okay, what about Itsy Bitsy Spider?
Yeah, okay, well, finger play.
Yeah.
It's an important one, though. That's a whole other episode.
Okay.
But did you read them to your children?
I think I just said them aloud to them and not read it.
Perfect, because one of the things that's really important in language and literacy development is that foundation in orality, the oral language, the storytelling through language itself. And while books are wonderful, really the most important thing we can do for children is speak to them and tell these stories. And that's one of the reasons that all of these types of literature have stood the test of time, because they've been passed down orally. You know them, you can say them anywhere, and then you have also this immediate connection, which brings us all together in just that unity of, we all know Humpty Dumpty. Mm-hmm. You know, you can be sitting at the table with your family and someone could start Humpty Dumpty and everybody says it, and there's just such an incredible thing about that belonging and connectedness. You know, as a matter of fact, this morning our granddaughter was with us before school, and she had found a box of trinkets, and my husband was talking to her about them, and his granddad worked on the railroad. So it was a lot of stuff from the railroad, and keys and pens of, acknowledgement for years served and all of those things. And he and I both started singing, "I've been working on the railroad," and just, we know it. And right. So it was just kind of a fun little getting ready in the morning, making our coffee in the kitchen with her, and we're just both singing, "I've been working on the railroad." And she's, of course, looking at us like that's kind of weird and also very cool, because she's just a little skeptical, of new things sometimes. But anyway, but it brings that just automatic connection, which is so important for our souls and just the way we are made to belong and be together. So they definitely do that. But telling them orally is the most important thing you can do.
Okay, so let's break it down and let's talk about nursery rhymes first. Some people might think, oh, those are silly. Why are they so important? Tell us why they are crucial.
Well, they are crucial because they have these short, kind of dynamic, memorable, full stories. So, you do Jack and Jill went up the hill to fetch a pail of water. There's the beginning, the middle. Jack fell down and broke his crown, and Jill came tumbling after. And you have an end. So they're a very comprehensive story, right? And they have this pattern of language that gives children the rhythm that they need to really build a strong foundation in literacy and orality. Rhyming is such an important skill for children. And so a lot of nursery rhymes, naturally, that's what they are. They're rhymes, right? And there are a lot of people who are concerned sometimes with some of those fairy tales, nursery rhymes, etc. Because if you know the background behind them, then you think, oh, I'm not going to teach my children Ring Around the Rosie. But the reality is the children don't need the weight of that information, right? They do benefit greatly from the oral language and the patterns of language they're developing through nursery rhymes. And so there are just so many benefits in those that we've talked about, the rhyming, the connectedness,
the phonemic awareness,
which is the sounds that letters make. So those things are important.
Mm-hmm.
So the language skills are just really rich. Right. Through these experiences. They seem simple, but the things that they give the children are really complex in their brain wiring for language.
And what an easy thing for parents and educators to give to children, all of those things packed up into a fun nursery rhyme.
Right.
Love
Absolutely. And there's just something happy about it. You start to repeat Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, and it's something wonderful and peaceful about it every time.
All right, let's move into fairy tales.
Okay.
Tell me some examples of what fairy tales are.
Okay, so some examples of fairy tales are Cinderella, Snow White, Jack and the Beanstalk is even a fairy tale.
Okay.
So fairy tales, again, passed down orally, but they're imaginative stories, and they often have like mythical people and kingdoms and mythical creatures, and so good versus evil, and what's going to prevail. And usually, in the fairy tale, almost always nowadays, fairy tales, the good prevails. But they're just, again, a beautiful way for us to connect. And these lessons that they teach and they instill in children about overcoming evil are so incredibly valuable for their emotional intelligence and resilience. Realizing that they live through these stories of conquering fears and making it through bad and hard things, and knowing you're going to come out on the other side and it's going to be okay. And even knowing that sometimes bad things happen. That's a really tricky thing, and the weight of that on the children definitely has to do with their stage of development and their temperament. I mean, you have someone who's just a really highly sensitive child, and you can adapt these stories to reach them in a gentle way, because if they can imagine things very vividly, possibly, and that might be harder for them. So you can just kind of temper the story to match the child, but still they benefit from all of the oral language and the literacy development that comes with that.
So Three Little Pigs, is that one?
The Three Little Pigs. The Three Little Pigs yes, it is a fairy tale. I have to think for a minute.
Okay.
It is a fairy
Little
tale.
Red Riding Hood is one that made me pause as a mom, thinking, ooh, I don't know if I want to send that message, but you're saying whatever they're ready for. And then that's hard to know sometimes. So here's something that you'll hear me say again and again and again, because I don't think we can be reminded of this enough, is that God did a really incredible thing with the brain. When he created the brain, the brain is created so that we will not create a visual image in our brains that our hearts can't handle unless we have been exposed to it somewhere else. So that means what we consider gruesome and scary, etc., most likely comes from something that we have seen that has informed that visual. So before we had movies and television, etc., you could tell these really kind of scary stories and children could still sleep at night. It would be what they went to bed with, because they couldn't even imagine what it was like for someone to cut open the wolf and the grandma to jump out. Right? So now children who are burdened with so much visual input, it's really that they struggle. They will often struggle. And that's hard too as a society, because, October is, with the Halloween and all of the things in society, such a challenging time of year for young children and teachers and parents. There are so many horrible visual images that children could just never create, nor can they really make sense of. So it is okay, taking into account also, of course, what your children have been visually exposed to. Mm-hmm.
And they view stories very differently than we do. So we always have to remember that, and we have to approach that delicately. Sometimes, again, people tend to think, oh, children are so smart, they understand, they're so verbal, they can repeat it, but their hearts aren't ready. The information can be too heavy. So it does depend on the age and stage of the children.
Okay, and talking about the age and stage, our youngest children here at the school do a lot with nursery rhymes. Our goal for them is that they leave their 2 years in the farmhouse, which is our preschool. Sometimes they'll be there 3 years, but that they leave with 12 to 15 nursery rhymes embedded in them. Right. And then moving into the cottage or our kindergarten, we spend a lot of time on fairy tales.
All
year, really.
Right. And Why don't you talk a little bit about what that looks like? You do the different versions of a fairy tale.
Yeah. Well, the first time that we tell a fairy tale, we tell it orally with no book. Because storytelling is so important, and there's just a really big difference in receiving that story just from your words and no pictures. So we'll tell it aloud, then we'll read a few different versions of it, and even if it's the same version but just by a different author or illustrator, it does change it up a little bit. And so you might think the fourth day in a row for Goldilocks, but no, they love it every time. And then we explore so many and compare and contrast them. And then at the end of the year, they perform fairy tale plays for their parents.
So precious.
Which is a special tradition. Yeah.
Yeah, it really is. And, and this is something that I'm struggling with too, always, because as educators, we're always reflecting on our practices. We're always, informing what we're doing and trying to make sure that we don't fall into patterns that, won't allow us to grow. So one of the things that is on my mind right now, and I don't know if I've shared this with you or not, but we just had our fairy tale plays. And one of the things we know about children is they're becoming, I feel like, in some ways, kind of more emotionally fragile.
Okay.
In some ways. And I know that's a loaded statement, so nobody panic. But for example, when they did the Little Red Hen,
okay,
the version that they opted to play out was, and if you don't know the Little Red Hen, I'll give you a little synopsis. She's going to take the wheat, grind the wheat, make the bread, make a loaf of bread. She's asking all the other characters if they will help her. At every stage, they say no. They don't want to help her grind the wheat. They don't want to help her make the bread. They don't want to help her do any of the work. And then when the bread is made, they come and they're like, oh, it smells so good. I want some of that bread. And she says, in the original version, she says, no, you can't have this bread. You didn't do the work. And that's one of the beautiful things is you learn lessons through these types of literature. There are very important lessons that you learn in fairy tales and fables. And so she says, no, you can't have the bread. I did all the work. You don't just get to sweep in here and, gain all the glory for the product. And so, but no, that's not the version we did.
Well, there's a reason why we did that version.
I know. Go ahead.
Okay, no, tell them the version we did.
Well, okay, no, the version that we did was, and then the Little Red Hen knew they felt bad. So she shared the bread, and next time they helped. So,
and the reason we did that is because the very first year of Storytale Plays, we had read so many different endings that we voted on the one that the children liked the best. And of course, they liked that one the best, I guess.
And you can't complain about children who are so kind-hearted that they're like, oh no, we would share the bread. And then next time, now we know. Which, that's a beautiful thing too. And they're having the conversations. And that's why they're gaining the lessons that we want them to gain about developing character and the moral lessons, etc. But I was thinking like, oh, well, children do need consequences. In life, they need to understand there are consequences in life. And so I just kind of chuckled because that's something that we've kind of been tarrying through right now with children understanding the consequences of behavior, and us when we're educating people about supporting children through big feelings and how to kind of accept natural consequences and learning to be fully emotionally intelligent. You have to be able to handle disappointment, or, you have to understand when you're doing something that is not socially appreciated.
Right.
So anyway, it was just kind of funny. I laughed because we've been having those other conversations, but the children do decide.
Well, so next year, maybe no bread for anyone.
No bread for you.
I support it.
We're gonna, So anyway, but there are so many versions, and I know they go through all of those, and then they do get to speak into which one they tell, and they are so kind-hearted. They're just so precious.
Okay, so nursery rhymes, super important. Fairy tales. And now let's talk about tall tales. What are they? What's the difference?
Okay, tall tales are so fun, right? So tall tales actually are American folklore. They're really unique to America. And so, other cultures have them, but they do tend to be aligned with American culture, right? And these are these exaggerated stories, kind of larger than life, just people performing impossible things. And so the children, through these stories, we celebrate the magic of storytelling and stretching our imaginations, and also sharing historical times and things that have happened, and just kind of really embracing laughter and awe and could you imagine if, and what a beautiful way to grow intelligence. And so, these are stories like Paul Bunyan and Pecos Bill and Johnny Appleseed. And so sharing these kind of cultural traditions through these tall tales is really a way to really stretch imagination and also explain things like how the railroad was built, things like that. So they're so fun.
Yeah, and right now in the primary, our first grade group has been exploring tall tales all year, and now they're dictating their own tall tales, and so they're getting the opportunity to explore exaggeration and different adjectives and ways to describe things and use their imagination. So that's a pretty cool thing.
And such a beautiful developmental pairing right there. So, in the primary grades, once they're first grade, second grade, third grade is our primary. Simply because the school for young children ends at the end of third grade. But primary would go on through elementary school in most places. But anyway, that's a perfect developmental match. So they have this foundation of language and literature and oral storytelling, and we're just continuing to grow that through sharing these different styles of stories.
Okay, let's talk about fables.
So fables are the last one we're talking about today, right? So fables are short stories, and they're really great for teaching moral lessons, right? So often animals are used for characters in fables. Children just relate to that. So you have talking animals, and you have, one unfortunate thing I think also in kind of the adultifying of children that I've seen change over time is taking away the magical belief of fairy tales and fables. And, I think that there are some people who are afraid we don't want to encourage that because it's not like a logical, mature adult way of thinking. Well, no, it's not, and it shouldn't be. Children need to grow their imaginations. They need that language, like you were talking about, to understand later adjectives, how these things go together, and what jobs they have in writing and reading. And so we don't need to, again, give them adult versions or rob them of the joy of that part of their childhood. We have to preserve and save that part of their childhood because it is so important and so valuable to learn lessons through talking animals. Well, animals don't really talk, don't say that. Let's just live in those moments of believing it, because what we want the children to gain from those is rich language, of course, and also the moral lessons that run so deep and just resonate with us forever. The tortoise and the hare, those so important lessons, slow and steady wins the race. Those things will serve us well our whole lives. You're never too old for the lessons. But it's a perfect age in early childhood to learn these stories. And they have simple plots, but just really clear, profound lessons in them.
Lion and the Mouse, is that one?
Yes, The Lion and the Mouse. That's another
Ant
good
and
one.
the Grasshopper?
Yes.
Okay.
That's a good one. So just so many, they actually come from Aesop's fables.
Okay.
So, and they're associated with Aesop, who in Greece, ancient Greece, is credited with recording a lot of these and sharing these, passing them on. So it just really helps us understand more of like the human condition and behaviors. And these metaphors are just so applicable constantly through our lives. So you cannot forget the importance of fables. They're really sweet. And, we spend a lot of time going, okay, which one's a fable? Which one's a fairy tale? Which one's a nursery rhyme? Which one's and it's fun. Some of them cross the styles and they actually can be in two different categories. But it's just kind of really fun to think about, which is what we want to start the conversation thinking about. What is the difference and why do they fit in different stages of development?
Right, and why they are so important.
They're very important.
And what I love about it is, before we got on here, we were talking about it too, and you said there doesn't have to be like a lesson or an activity that goes with them.
Right. And that's something that is so important in our philosophy, is that really what we want is children to learn rather than for us to be constantly teaching. So many people take like everything and go, okay, we're going to do Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. So now what activity are we going to do to embed that in their brains? Well, what's going to embed that is repetition. What's going to embed that is the joy of sharing the language over and over and getting silly with it and changing it up and, just really interacting with it. That's learning. And so we might, and we do put a basket of materials, like when the 3 billy goats gruff, or whatever it is, the 3 little pigs. We'll put a basket of materials in the classroom in an area on a table or what have you that have the characters and the materials, and the children will just naturally go and retell the story.
Mm-hmm.
And that is so valuable. We strongly encourage that. We strongly encourage puppets that tell the stories and, finger plays, felt boards, all of those things. But I don't want teachers to feel like in order for it to be valid and valuable, it has to have a science experiment that goes with it. Do the science experiment, because it's really cool to do the science experiment where you can make the egg bounce. And then would Humpty Dumpty have broken if he had been able to bounce? You can have those conversations that might come from the connections the children make. But enjoy the stories for the sake of the stories. Don't feel like, to make it valid, we now have to connect this experience.
Right.
Because that's absolutely not true.
Right.
So,
yes.
So to kind of break it down, in the 4 different types, we talked about the nursery rhymes, the fairy tales, the tall tales, and the fables. So the nursery rhymes are really about rhythm and rhyme. And that foundation in oral language, so important for reading, so important for language and literacy development. Fairy tales are kind of more about magic, and they kind of have castles and morals also. So kind of good versus evil in the fairy tales. The tall tales are all about exaggeration and humor. They're just fun and funny. And then the last that we talked about are the fables, which are the lessons, and they involve the animals. So those are more really focused on the moral lessons and bring in animals as characters to relate to, which children just do that so beautifully. So,
well, thank you for sharing that with us today.
Yeah.
Be sure to subscribe, comment, and share with other people that would be passionate about our mission of saving childhood. And check out our 14 tenets on our Save Childhood page, and we're continuing to build content there, and it's exciting to kind of see the Save Childhood movement grow, because that's really what we all want to do, is give children a childhood they deserve. So check those out and help us to help you. Yeah, and let's keep the conversation going on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. New episodes launch every Tuesday morning at 6 a.m. on Spotify and Apple Podcasts.
And on YouTube.
YouTube? Yeah, you could see us. Yeah.
You're so lucky.
Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Bye. Have a great day.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us today. To learn more and join the movement, go to savechildhood.org.